it over to China. That was considered productivity, right? Productivity growth is either more tech or find lower labor costs,
That's the sad part we're in. And the
right?
Clinton,
Those things. That's the sad part. Yeah, they're not looking after their own people. They're looking after their own bottom lines.
well, the Clinton administration allowed China to be on the world trade. Made China more exclusive to everyone.
Yes,
And
yeah.
back during the Clinton administration, a lot of people didn't know how much damage that caused. I still remember the stickers on the back of cars, like when I was living in Toronto, and we'd be on the highway, and on the back of the bumper, it would say, "Please buy an American car built by your brother or your countryman in Michigan." And we would see those stickers like, "Buy an American built car and keep your American brothers or keep Canadians and Americans working." And because we were already
I
losing
guess
it then. That was the early '80s. Those bumper stickers were out, and we were already starting to slip down a slippery slope. And economically, we don't even in Canada, right? It's so bad. We don't even own a majority of our bigger coal mines are owned by China. A majority of our gold mines are owned by. I could look this. I could bring the articles up if people don't believe me. A majority of our housing, not a majority, but a good percentage of our housing is vacant and owned by foreign Chinese investors, and it's the Canadian government that put these things into place because they were no back in 2010 when they introduced the Vancouver model that basically bring your laundered money in. We don't care where you got it from, no questions asked model. And you could go ahead and buy property and just leave it empty. But if a Canadian buys a second home, they have to live in it for 2 years before they could rent it out. But if you're a foreign investor from China, we don't care. Buy it, leave it empty. We don't care. And that's a big problem. People could look into it and say, wait, if you want to buy a second home in Canada, you have to live in it before you could rent it out. Yeah, the laws here are draconian for Canadian proper, but but the laws don't apply equally to everybody else. It's so economically they knew, Canada knew, Australia knew, New Zealand knew, these UK knew, they knew we were losing in the early '80s. So what they started to do was started to ramp up the building, start ramping up the infrastructure, and because they knew eventually we were going to be bought out, a tsunami of investors are going to come out and just completely obliterate us. And that's this economic takeover we've been talking about for the last 10 years here, and we're seeing in full force.
Yes, part of it. Well, it was a poison pill, right? It was a Faustian bargain. We got all kinds of cheap manufactured goods from China to mask, at least partially mask over the destruction from industrialization over here. But China had this massive trade surplus, and the only way we are going to keep them in the game is if we gave them the right to come and buy stuff from us. And since we don't export any, as you've said yourself, we effectively exported like real estate,
Yeah.
resources, and things like that, right? Mines and other production facilities.
Mm-hmm.
But it's reached a point in time where the utility of this to China is dwindling by the day too,
Yes, it is.
because I mean you've already had tariff barriers and sanctions and things like that against China. The United States is, as Henry Kissinger said, it's dangerous to be America's enemy, but it's fatal to be America's friend. And I think the Chinese have come to that conclusion, and I think they're starting to back away. I would not be surprised to see a lot of the stuff come back on the market.
Well, they're going
In
to
some
need.
ways, as I've said before, it could be a financial neutron bomb.
Well, trains
Go ahead.
going east and west across Canada. People are observing and saying everything. It's all going to the coast to be shipped to China. Our coal, our lumber, everything. Um, some of the lumber
Yeah.
mills that I know of are in production to sell to China. They're not even in production to sell to Canadian proper. And if you want to buy lumber to build a house here in Canada, prepare $70,000 to $140,000 just in two by fours, just to buy two by fours. That's how. Remember the lumber wars we went into about 3 years ago, and it hasn't really cooled down as much as it should have, to reflect where wages are. Where the average Canadian could say, "Well, I got a bit of land my dad left me. I'm just going to build a house there." Well, he can't build a house. He's got to get permits. He's got to get all this ducks in a row. He's got to get all this stuff done. And in the end, you know what I mean. He builds a house that he could realistically build somewhere in Albuquerque, New Mexico, for 50 grand, and it costs him 600,000 to do the same thing here. That's the problem we're at right now. Canada's in a lot of. I'm sorry, I'm just rambling on here, but yeah.
Yeah, we're in big trouble. Yeah, no question about it. I mean, the second largest country on earth, and there's no cheap land here.
And there's
Plenty.
no and you know, it has to a lot to do with the crown land system that we have to. It also has a lot to do with foreign investing and leaving everything empty and creating artificial shortages too, right? So
Yes, yes, that should not be permitted to happen. It should never have been permitted to happen. It should have been regulated against before it even became a problem.
yep.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah, and they didn't, because needless to say, it's usual. There was probably bribery. There was probably a certain amount of compromat. You know, someone has a video of someone doing something they shouldn't ought to have been doing, and so they just pretend not to. You just pretend not to see it, right? And yeah, here we are, and we're a small country. I mean, it's an enormous place, but population-wise, even now, it's a small country. We don't. There's no room for this kind of nonsense here,
no,
and
we
it just
don't.
becomes so much more. It becomes so much more obvious here than it would say in the United States, where you can literally use, the whole territory. Canada, I mean, the upper two-thirds of Canada is basically uninhabitable. It's not impossible, but unless you can work remotely, there's not much to do there, unless you
Mhm.
work at a mine or something.
And it's expensive to live up in some of them places too. I had a friend telling me he lives in Whitehorse or something, and it's a fortune to live up there.
Yes, it is. Yeah, they actually have northern tax credits. Like they give people financial incentives, breaks on their taxes to live further north. Because there's just not that many people up there. So the supply chains, yeah, they'll go there, but it's way out of their way. So it's everything costs extra to get to these places.
Hmm.
And
It's
I think they should be more efficient than that. But I think this is more of an afterthought anyway. I don't think these people have any kind of overarching um, strategy for the development of Canada. They want to increase the population to 100 million, but
But
like
the
why?
infrastructure won't support it. The European expansion is finished. The Europeans brought over sanitation. They built the Sky Dome. They built the Air Canada Center. Well, how do you know that, Mike? It was Europeans because my dad worked on it. He was a Portuguese, and all the crews were Portuguese, Italian, and Greeks, and built all these
Yeah.
buildings, built all the roads, built the infrastructure, connected the country. Highway wise, when it came to maintaining and building, blowing up rock to get through, it was all European expansion. It was all heavy duty European expansion that then basically in 1993 Canada decided to close immigration from Europe because they felt that they needed to open the doors to other and give other people a chance to come. But everyone was given a chance to come, whether they were from Pakistan, Ethiopia, China, wherever they were from, they had a chance to come to Canada. It's just it was just very expensive to come to Canada. When my family when we came to Canada, we had to borrow money from family to come here. We had to make sure we knew the national anthem. We had to make sure we understood basic English. We had to make sure a lot of things just to be able to be and work in Canada, right? And it wasn't cheap to come to Canada and back in those days. We had to really really, and then a lot of other cultures did not want to take that chance or did not want to, you know what I mean? Because then they would have to contribute to the infrastructure. They would have to contribute to building the country. And a lot of cultures just didn't want to be part of that in that era. They wanted to come when everything was here, the electricity, the running water, the systems are all put in place and they don't have to do nothing. Just come in, go on a computer, click a few buttons, talk a lot, and that's it.
Oh, pretty much, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's we're not talking immigrants here anymore. Oh, okay, there's a difference between settlers and immigrants. Yes, this place was just raw prairie and a bush, and somebody had to push in the roads and the right of ways and build the towns and the infrastructure and get it all going. Most of that stuff was in by the mid 1960s.
Hmm.
Canada was built already. Yeah, Canada doesn't need building anymore.
Hmm.
It's built. Like I mean, in some cases it's underbuilt because we got a bunch of people here that can't afford real estate. But that's more to do with monetary policy
That's correct,
than
sir.
than to do with the reason that people can't afford things. Either you got to bring prices down, or which could crash the banks, or you've got to bring wages up, which means closing the borders, and or something in between them so that those two lines intersect again. and it's political suicide for whoever decides to do one or the other.
Yeah.
But I've always maintained that I think that math and physics and thermodynamics and all of these cool things are going to do the job for us, and we just have to hang on until it happens. Anyone who can make it in Canada will stay. Anyone who can't make it in Canada without some kind of government support won't be here in 10 years.
That's why we're
They
seeing
simply
this
won't.
mass reversal of people moving, going back to their countries. And unfortunately, Canada's not offering you a free flight back to your country of origin. America is offering right now a free flight back to Honduras or Ecuador or wherever you're from. But because Canada doesn't border kind of like a third worldish type country, they have to fly in their migrants, and that's on the taxpayer, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So and the hotel stays and everything is on the taxpayer. But a lot of them are realizing they don't want to be in Canada, so they want to go back, but they're not offered a free plane ticket back to where they were from. Unfortunately, they're pretty much stuck here until they can make their money. Kind of like that movie, Born in East LA, where
Yeah. Oh,
Buddy's
yeah.
he didn't have his passport or ID on him, so he got deported back to Mexico, and they wouldn't let him back into America. And that's how a lot of people feel here today. It's that Born in East LA scenario where they were brought over, thinking there was going to be yellow brick roads and lollipop guilds and the lullaby guilds, but there was nothing there.
Yeah.
And now they realize that they just want to go back to their country and be back with their people, which is nothing wrong. It's just they don't have the funds to do it now. So
Yeah. So they're kind of trapped here.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a total scam. It's a scam to them too. I mean, I'm not knocking on migrants coming here. A lot of them coming from terrible places, and there were rumors and advertising things like that. Oh, come to Canada, the land of milk and honey, and everything will be here for you. This is a harsh place to live.
It's not
Not
easy.
just climate. I mean, it's a harsh place to live.
They
It's
flipped
not
the
easy
switch.
to live here. It really never has been.